Hello, I am Laura Dryjanska, and I am a professor of psychology at Asbury University in Wilmore, Kentucky, in the United States. I am also a part-time lecturer at the University of Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński in Warsaw, Poland. Today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of positive listening in the perspective of someone who is training graduate students, in coaching. This is something that I do in Poland, and I am very much interested in the phenomenon of how vital positive listening is for coaching. So, of course, when thinking about coaching, first of all, we consider, maybe some literature that we have about coaching, what are some handbooks of coaching, and unsurprisingly, when consulting the complete handbook of coaching that you can see here, even though we do not see a specific chapter fully dedicated to listening, it is very frequently mentioned. This handbook talks about different types of coaching, of course, career coaching, life coaching, different kinds of coaching that we may come across, group coaching as opposed to individual coaching, and specifically a section on listening is a part of section on skills and performance coaching. Actually, listening is a part of a dynamic in the lead model of coaching. It is a stripped model of the coaching process that actually revolves around 4 phases of conversations, implying that listening is there throughout. But there is the listen, empathize, appreciate, and design components. All those 4 components kind of interwoven with each other. That is again in the skills and performance coaching model. So listening, as you can see, is the first component here, and really coaching begins with listening, right? What we are hoping to hear are the stories of our clients, because this is how we get to know them. It is a positive listening. It is a listening aimed at improvement in our client, improvement in ourselves, mutual understanding, respect, thriving, right? Like the purpose of coaching. We want to listen to what our coachees have to say, because that will help us ask good questions. A lot of people, like my students, when they start, it's like, okay, so what questions should we ask? Give us some cheat sheets with the best questions or helpful questions that can be used. And while we can maybe help the beginning coaches in those ways, there's really no good questions without listening first. Our questions absolutely have to be shaped by the client, by listening to the client. That's where it starts. When someone tells us a story, we are brought into that. There is the natural curiosity that a coach should possess, and that will lead our questions. Our questions are often based on just how the coachee, our client, sees the world and perceives it. And we can often catch that through metaphors, for example. Some of my clients use beautiful metaphors related to their childhood. I recently ended a very good coaching relationship, very good experience, I believe so, both for the client and myself. And he has mentioned a story of, okay, this is just like riding a bike. I don't have those support wheels anymore. I was, for the maybe last few weeks, so to speak, holding that bike, and now he's ready to go on his own. And hopefully he'll remember what we've learned from our session. He'll remember the type of questions to ask of himself. But the idea of that metaphor really helped me understand kind of how he was perceiving our sessions, and I was able to build on that, emphasize it, which is what a lot of coaching is. Careful listening helps us see sometimes some patterns, some important thoughts that as people talk, they may not even themselves pick up so much on, or they take them for granted. So a good listener will be able to hear that and help the client through it. What I did, and I'm going to present, or I am presenting here, basically with my class that was Introduction to Coaching. I had 19 graduate psychology students, specifically in the major of, or specialization, if you wish, in psychology of work and organizational psychology. And those students had their first approach into what it felt like to be a coach. It was structured as a lab, with them having some experiences of just, okay, let's delve into it, with not as much theoretical preparation, some tenets in the GROW model of coaching. They were invited to just try it with their fellow classmates. What is it like to be a coach? So I have provided a structured assessment for each one of those sessions. It was great because that assessment was also enriched by self-feedback and feedback from fellow students who were as observers of a session looking at it, and of course the feedback from the coachee, or the person who was being coached, also had a chance to speak into how it felt for her. So as I was going through that structured assessment and evaluating it in, again, more structured way, I could see that the positive listening came across as the most frequent important point given in topic. A person who was being coached saying, I could feel and I could understand that you were really listening to me. You were carefully listening to me. You were open to what I was saying. You were actually hearing well what I was saying. Sometimes you were again, emphasizing those small things that I didn't realize that I blurted, and suddenly it made sense. So that was the feedback from the coachees. That was very interesting to hear. Something else that I saw, those who did well in those first experiences of being a coach, they were also high in empathy and genuine concern for the client. So this is very nice because it really fits that theoretical model of lead. Again, listen, empathize, appreciate, and design. And that empathy was clear. They felt like, yes, I can understand you. Yes, even though you did not share very many details, it was clear to me that you, as my coach, maybe went through something like that or something similar. That's the key here. Coaching is not about mentoring or giving advice, but empathy is something that the coachees would pick up, even though the coaches themselves would not really give very many personal details. They felt understood not only intellectually on that intellectual level, but also more on that emotional level. And that was key. And that's when empathy comes in. And I feel like this is yet another way of maybe understanding positive listening, the term that I elaborated on in an article for Global Listening published in 2022, making some connections with positive psychology and Seligman's work. But that sense of positive listening as understood in the particular specific example through coaching, it made me realize what an important role empathy played there. Also appreciation for the client, being non-judgmental, really listening to them. There's no such thing as a stupid or silly problem. There's no such thing as a stupid or silly solution. Giving a person a sense of respect, very much based on their dignity as a person, their capacity to share, to reflect, and them being an expert in their own lives, and coach being there in a position of a listener, someone who as an active listener can really pick up again on those patterns or some great ideas that are just bubbling under the surface, and maybe help them get out of the surface. So the idea is that coaching is not something that feels like an interrogation and someone being bombarded with questions. I feel another important feedback, another important theme that was very clear through this experience of working with coaches to be, or coaches in training, was the fact that they also appreciated silence. Silence, which meant processing. Oftentimes that feedback of someone who felt like, oh, you really listened to me, it meant that that person had time and space in the coaching session to stop and think. And that would often or sometimes occur in silence. And that silence was something that was respected, something that both the coach and the coachee felt comfortable with, which that made an important piece of just the success of the coaching session, a sense of safety that is built in a relationship. So the idea of the sense of just relational capacity. And a former colleague of mine, Dr. Todd Hall, and also Dr. Liz Hall, they wrote an excellent book emphasizing that relational component and what that means. A big piece of the relational component is the ability to listen, is the willingness to listen. On the one hand, the ability, it's a skill. For some students, it wasn't as easy as for others. It didn't maybe come as naturally. They wanted to talk. They were anxious to ask questions. But for others, it was easier, right? So as any skill, it can be perfected. It can be refined, and it should be used. But before we actually have that ability to listen, well, first of all, the willingness to listen, and willingness to listen as a coach, a willingness to maybe risk something. There's a little bit of risk involved, and from the student's perspective, oh, what if I will not have enough time to properly close the session? What if I will not have enough time to do this or to do that? But willingness to take that risk. Maybe I will lose some points for not having this component in my session, but rather than forcing it, really being there with the client. And that, as I said, is very much this relational component, the relational mindset. So, the question that, for instance, Bentley asks, are we getting any better at listening? Maybe it's harder. Maybe this is something that specifically we should emphasize in training of psychology students in general, and organizational work psychology students, and specifically students in an introduction to coaching, not assuming that this is just something that we naturally do, or we're just, I'm just a good listener, so this is why I decided to study psychology. But even if you are, that's great, but you can get better at it. How do you exercise that skill? How do you use that? How do you polish it? How do you adapt it to different settings? It will be different for a coach. It will be different for a clinical psychologist or a counselor. It will be different as a mentor. So again, what do you do with that skill is extremely important. So, just to finish the discussion of that model that has really provided a very helpful theoretical umbrella for what I could clearly see in the data, in the evaluations. Finally, the design component in the lead model, right? So again, looking into how listening will actually, as we listen to the stories, sometimes reframe them with empathy and appreciation. Then there's the strategic design for skills and performance improvements. That often is something that will emerge from a more mature our coach. Again, in coaching, one of the strategies that we discuss is design thinking and how it plays out, and how it's imperative that it doesn't just come up on itself, that design thinking is very much rooted in careful listening to the client, careful listening to the environment, to different voices if we're dealing with a specific problem, for instance, for an organization that we are trying to solve by implementing design thinking. So, of course, while with my students, the coach and coachee, those were dyads, but the question for some future research and some future feedback is, what would it look like in more complex settings when we have more of a group coaching setup, or even a focus group implemented when we are using the design thinking technique? I believe that would be an extremely interesting way to consider. And of course, I also want to recognize here that I am a member of the International Coaching Federation, and it is extremely important that specifically the International Coaching Federation, which provides some accreditation standards and some worldwide standards in coaching, the art of listening is related to the 5 key principles. So first of all, remembering that coaching is about the client. It's not about the coach. It's not about getting through a list of questions or ticking off certain boxes. That idea of being comfortable with the silence that clearly emerged through my analysis of the sessions. Also inviting people not to analyze and overthink. Some analysis is good, it's a part of listening, but it shouldn't take us away from listening. Another important component, which maybe did not emerge as much with the students who are pretty homogeneous in terms of their background, is the idea that we should recognize our own biases as a coach. And as much as possible, what helps us to listen, if we can enter the coaching session in an optimal mental and emotional state. And that's related to even our physical state. If we can be well rested, at peace with how our day is going, not overly worried, if we can enter in that optimal state, whatever that means for each person, that will have an impact on how we listen. If we had a good night of sleep, if we had our meals, if things are going well for us, we're providing for our own physical needs, then probably we will also do better as coaches who are implementing that positive listening in what we do. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share those thoughts as a part of the Global Listening Festival.